welcome everybody. I'm Corinne Krikorian. I am part of the Careers Life in Yale team on the Board of Governors. And I'm really excited because today we have an awesome speaker who is going to tell us, she's written a book, she's been an executive at multiple companies, she's an entrepreneur, and I think she's got a lot of interesting lessons, and I have found her incredibly inspiring, and I think you will too. So I want to introduce you to Danielle Kristine Toussaint. She is the Chief External Affairs Officer at the NewSchools Venture Fund, and she leads brand storytelling and engagement, brokers and manages strategic partnerships, and provides support and oversight to development and communications at that fund. Prior to there, she was at the Aspen Institute. She also founded a company, She Thinks Purple, which was a woman-powered creative agency leveraging storytelling and digital content experiences, and also has written a book, Dare to Think Purple, a survival guide for women in social entrepreneurship. So she has written and published a lot of other places too. So she's really got a whole bunch of things to share with us in terms of her path. But I don't want to take up any more time, Danielle, because I think your story is so interesting. I would just love to ask you about your story, your life and career. Obviously, you're a Yale alumni, so that's a part of it. But start with, what are you doing now? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then maybe you can tell us how you landed there through your journey.
All right. I'm going to tell you where I am now, but I'm going to tell you that where I am now is the direct result of all the places that I've been before. And I can't do it. I can't enter a space with like Yaleys. I love this community so much. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of this community since I was 8 years old. Like I announced to my parents from the backseat of our blue Taurus that I was going to Yale at age 8. And I'm from Connecticut. And I think that's an important thing to mention. I was born in Waterbury, Connecticut, and coming into New Haven was a very normal, regular occurrence for my family. And we would drive through and I would see Whaley Avenue. We would like sort of get to the New Haven Green, but I don't know, for some reason on that day, I noticed something about like the campus. It was the first time I recognized that there was a campus, and I asked about it. I said, okay, Mom, Dad, like, what is this? And they sort of were like, oh, this is Yale, and like really smart people go there. And I did the math in my little 8-year-old head. And I was like, I just crushed 3rd grade. And I'm going to college, like, this is where I'm going. And there was nothing about our family dynamic at that moment that should have made that statement true, right? Like both of my parents finished their educations while I was growing up. So it wasn't like there was this sort of legacy status that I was going to be able to follow in the steps of. It was completely trailblazing for my family. I was the first to get there. But everything they did between 8 and 18 facilitated that journey for me. They held like this space where I got to dream and believe things that were possible. And then they connected me to every possible educational opportunity that would make that true. So today I sit as the Chief External Affairs Officer for NewSchools Venture Fund, and we are a venture philanthropy. In many ways, we give and deploy our capital the way like a VC might. It's a lot of scrutiny. It's larger amounts that we're putting in as investments in entrepreneurs. But I see in all of those individuals that are part of this portfolio and in my colleagues, like the same possibility, that same like ability for us to create space for the belief for so many other young people, kids.
Real quick, when were you at Yale? When did you graduate?
I graduated in 2006. I was JE.
You got to say which college. So, and I was School of Management, so it doesn't even count.
And Jeff, honestly, the School of Management, when I was at Yale, was just starting to develop a lot of their innovation, education, social impact programming. Like that wasn't always part of their like fabric and DNA in the way that it is now. So there were so many people that were like, I felt like part of this burgeoning thought class around how you could mirror business and impact. but it wasn't as if it was this fully formed concept. And so I'm just deeply appreciative for so many alum who were doing that trailblazing at that time, because I feel like I graduated right at that moment where you had, you know, the TFAs and you had like so many other examples. You had Donors Choose, like people were building these things as examples of how you could have a different model for doing good.
So what was your experience at Yale like? I mean, I think, you mentioned you're kind of a first, right? And I always think that has, that can have a pretty profound effect on a Yale experience. But so talk to me about what Yale was like for you and how it's impacted you throughout your path. I think you've touched on that already.
Yeah, Yale was amazing. I'm looking and I see my absolute best friend in the whole world who I met during Bulldog Days is online, as well as our extended family. So hey, Kumba. Hi, Mariam. But I would say it was amazing. Some of my dearest and best friends to this day are folks that I met there. And what I also appreciated about Yale was, and I think I said this to you, Karen, in our earlier call, was I found my fellow Yaleys to genuinely be good humans, like very smart, brilliant, but just good intentioned people. And I thought that there was a lot of positives around the way that the university was just so, I think we're probably better than we've been, but at thinking about ways to help build community for folks that were coming in so you could facilitate that connection. I also remember one of my good friends saying that sometimes being there as someone who was first gen felt like you were playing taboo with best friends, where the cards and the cues that you think you're supposed to be using and navigating aren't it, because people are giving clues like, remember that time that we had that ice cream by that place when we were, and it was sort of so insular some moments where it was like, wait, is there a cheat code that I don't have? And so that was also the experience, right, of having to figure out what to even ask for, what supports could be available to be supportive. But there were people who showed up, just always showed an interest. Whitehall became a community that I felt very held and supported in exploring how I could be part of the New Haven nonprofit and impact space. There were members of the board at the time, like Ted Swenson, who just reached out and has been a mentor to me since I was an undergrad, others who came before. So I never felt like there was not a space that I could be comfortable and supported, but I definitely feel like being first has both the disadvantage of not always even knowing what's there and what you can access.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And you have in your book, you have 5 C's, and I know community is one of them: courage, creativity. Can you kind of talk about that as a little bit of your philosophy? Because I think that I would recommend everyone read the book. It's a great book. I left the book just wanting to go start my own business. So I guess if that was the point, but you've got these 5 C's. Do you want to talk about those a little bit, or I don't know if you can rattle them off right off the top of your head?
Of course. The idea of daring comes from a concept of just to be clear, my book, I interviewed more than 50 women who were successful social entrepreneurs. And I asked them all of the same questions. And then what I found were they were just these themes that kept coming up over and over and over again. And they weren't things about your lean canvas or your business model. They were all of these things that were about sort of how you built yourself to be successful and navigate, as a way of then being able to build a more successful enterprise. And so being clear and just sort of having an understanding from the start of where you're trying to go and why your goal is defined, while holding flexibly to how you get there, being creative. And the creative work that a lot of these folks talked about wasn't so much big imagination vision about product. It was about being able to reconstruct and imagine yourself in the world and how you will need to be different and change as new challenges arise so that you can meet them successfully. And there were folks who talked about, in particular, experiences that they had, like loss of parents, as ways that they had to reconstruct their identity in the world, become anchored again, and find the confidence to move forward. Being courageous, being confident, and ultimately building community are the last 3 of those C's. And the build community is one of my favorites because, especially for those of us that go to elite institutions and are highly networked, we may sometimes always think that the way that we build community has to be folks that occupy a similar space. but it was often people who were outside of what I was expecting who showed up to be sort of the champions and supporters, early clients and customers and folks that I needed at different moments. And so this idea of building community was about how we not be afraid to do something first and invite people to our party versus thinking that it already has to be perfect and that someone else has already built it and we just need entry to it. Often when you're doing something early and first, there isn't that existing infrastructure. You are the person who's building the thing that you want to see in the world, and others are waiting for it. And so it was more of an invitation to trust yourself and be okay stepping out and knowing that community sometimes follows after you're taking that first step.
You have a line in the book, throw your own party and you'll always be invited. I thought that was just a fabulous way of putting it. But can you talk about that, about sort of what does it mean to throw your own party, and how have you thrown your own party so that, you have ensured your invitations?
One of the things that a lot of early founders are struggling with is trying to balance both meeting everyone that they need to meet, also getting visibility for their idea, their product, their service, what have you. For me, it's always come from being willing to host events, host conversations, launch a meetup space. Everything that I do, I build the community around it so that I have the support that I need. I don't expect that it already exists. And in one instance, the expression was throwing a sort of 200 plus person conference in DC to begin to spark a discussion around where were the innovators who were both folks that identified as women and people of color, but also the broader ecosystem that wanted to be supportive of those that were starting out. And it was scary. I didn't have sponsors when I first began. I didn't have space. I had to ask so many people for so many things, but that one event has paid me back over and over and over again with so many of the folks that I met. Every speaker that I wanted ultimately said yes to me. We found a way to get to yes. And so I learned that in that instance, I could have waited to, sort of be invited to be a panelist or a moderator. I could have chased those opportunities down for the next 3 years. But by just hosting one conference and bringing everyone to me, I accelerated that growth and was able to also facilitate other folks who were there getting venture capital connections, having, lunches with investors. So many people sent me nice notes like, I can't believe I was on the stage with so-and-so, but we caught coffee afterwards. And this is what happened. I'm now in their portfolio. So to me, it's like, you never know what happens by just throwing your own party. And I don't think everybody needs to rush and throw a conference, and everybody's not an entrepreneur, but it could just be as simple as taking the first step to invite someone to coffee, even virtual coffee. We're a little zoomed out, but those small reach outs are ways that you invite people in, you take the first step, and it always, in my experience, has paid off.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know, you don't seem to be an introvert, but I kind of think as many of us Yaleys are introverts by nature. And that notion of sort of thinking the community is somewhere else versus being the kind of nucleus for it and creating our own. It's not something that I would kind of naturally gravitate to, but it's a powerful idea. I have that quote now in a little Post-it note on my computer, and hopefully I'll use it. So now you mentioned you're a social entrepreneur. Can you talk about that, and kind of what does that mean relative to, like, what is a social entrepreneur, and how do you define yourself in that way?
Thankfully, we have so many folks who have helped us see examples of this over the past, I would say, especially 2 decades. I think about women like Catherine Finney and Cheryl Conti, who were ahead of me at Yale, but who have built these incredible spaces and organizations and companies and invested in so many others. Cheryl Conti, I think, was the first Black woman unicorn. So, when we think about that, right, like that didn't exist, and has done it intentionally, saying that what I am building is not just for profit. I am building something for the purpose of changing social dynamics, of leaving the world better than I found it, of advancing social good. And I think that any person who embodies that, whether you're working within a company that's hundreds of years old, right? Or you are starting something brand new, if you show up every day with the mindset that the way in which you engage in business is going to shift something, is going to make the world better as a result of your direct effort, even if it's just creating better workplace conditions for people, then you're a social entrepreneur. You're someone who's choosing to engage in enterprise for social benefit. And I just think that this has become a default. With each generation, I see more and more of a natural instinct to start there with problem solving. I also think that any individual who's experienced any level of marginalization, and I truly mean that, anything that you experience that is not the norm, the standard, or what has the greatest sort of power in society, gives you a lens and an edge in being able to innovate and create something that is mission driven and impactful. And I see that spirit in so many folks, regardless of sector. And I think it's exactly the type of thinking that's necessary, especially as we navigate together a global pandemic, where there is no separation really for us between our everyday lives and evidence of the need for social innovation and change. Like, health is on everyone's mind always equally, as long as we are breathing the same air through masks. So it means that we have to be thinking about how the things we do every day shift and make better the experiences of ourselves, our neighbors, and ultimately future generations.
So now you mentioned, how having been in groups that have been marginalized can kind of affect your perspective and give you sort of ideas from a creative standpoint. How has being a Black woman shaped your journey as a business person and an entrepreneur?
I think it's shaped it in ways that I probably have accounted for. Some of those I talk about in my book, but then I think it's probably shaped it in ways that are surprising. There are two things that I always hold in balance. And one of them is that, yes, being a woman of color and being in spaces that there aren't always as many people who look like me means that I benefit and also deal with what's called like hypervisibility, which means it's usually going to be the case that someone remembers that they saw me. They're going to go, oh yeah, I think I saw Danielle, right? Or I think I met her, or she looks familiar, right? Because there's not that many people who look just like me. And I always thought that while some can see that as a disadvantage, because it means that, wow, if I mess up, it's going to be magnified. Everyone's going to know that it was me. It's also a superpower that if you do something good, it's going to be remembered. Everyone's going to know that it's you. It's not going to be mistakable, right? And so I've always leaned into the latter, which is, if you're going to remember that you met me, let it be for amazing reasons. Let it be for the contribution I made. Let it be for my not being afraid to speak up and put myself and voice into the room, because we need that. And so, yes, has it impacted it? Absolutely. We know that statistically there are a much harder or difficult set of challenges that are navigated by just women. And then, yes, people of color, and then, yes, Black women, like all of those intersectional things, they're true. I also believe that it's been amazing to me how by staying just open to the fact that the people who could support me might not look like me, might not know all of the things that make me who I am, but might still be genuinely interested in wanting to partner, that some of my like most beloved mentors and sponsors and champions at every point in my career have been men, have been white, have been of Asian descent, have been run an entire gamut of identity. And I don't believe that that's accidental. I think that that is because of a real instinct that I've had early on to just try to get to places of human connection. And I try to start with how I introduce myself, by talking about my values, by talking about what I hope to see in the world and what I'm doing every day to make it possible. And I have found that lots of people connect to my values, even if they know not what it's like to be a first generation, child of Jamaican immigrants, but they do know maybe what it's like for their family to have navigated a journey across difference or across borders. And they know what hard work has meant to their families, and they know what aspiration has meant to their families, and they have desires for their children. And because our values are aligned, we get to have a great conversation that maybe would never have happened if we stopped at the places of difference. So I feel like that's the invitation that I've always tried to take in my career, which is to figure out what's the human values that we are holding, and then lean really heavily into it as a way of sort of building a bridge.
So when you think about values, I mean, I always think about, you know, the challenge, right? We want to live our values. We also want to make a living, you know. How do you think about kind of balancing that kind of money and meaning in your career? And how have you kind of navigated that? Because I think that's kind of something a lot of us struggle with.
It's been particularly challenging for me because I have to make a living, right? I do not have the option. There is not sort of this generational wealth story that has allowed me the freedom to not have to think about if this is something I can make money doing. And so that's always been a tension for me. I always wondered, like, what would I be doing if I actually didn't need to get paid? And I'm sure in my 20s, my family was just like, girl, what are you doing in these like nonprofit jobs? Like, this is not the salary. We did not send you to school for this. But there's also another part, which was that like, it was hard for me to ever do something that didn't feel like it was going to be aligned to the things I cared most about in the world. And I was almost like allergic to working in spaces that were not socially oriented. And so I at least made the promise to myself that since I was going to be working anyway, I would seek out organizations where I felt like I could do the work on behalf of, alongside, or to the benefit of communities that I identified with and that I knew needed that talent and that investment of time. And I don't regret any of it. I think it's wonderful that I'm in philanthropy because I'm able to sort of bridge that maybe better than I ever have now. But I think that all of the other work experiences, even in smaller nonprofits, allowed me to be able to learn very early key leadership and people management and project management lessons that I might not have had the opportunity to if I had gone other paths where that sort of level of engagement is reserved for much higher sort of ranking people in an organization. So the trade-off for me was that earlier in my career, I don't think that I was driven more by the sort of financial reward. I really was so choosy, but I think it's balanced out because the experience that I've had has allowed me to accelerate really quickly and get to spaces where I could both be, you know, sort of meaningfully compensated for my expertise while also still working in a mission-driven way.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you know, one of the things in one of those 5 C's in the book, confidence, and I think that's something that, I mean, you seem to have in spades. A lot of us struggle with, especially as women. How do you, like, were you just naturally confident and born that way? And how do you kind of keep yourself, you know, going back when, you know, sometimes, especially as an entrepreneur, you know, you get knocked down a lot in that journey?
I struggle with confidence just like everybody else. I do think that very early on, I had a lot of practice in being able to both step out boldly and feel rewarded versus being sort of cut down to size, right? I was an interesting kid. I threw a retirement party for my 3rd grade teacher, and I had no job and no formal authority, but I was able to get like the adults in my life to all sign on to this big vision, and I got 16 8-year-olds to give up recess and participate in this. So there was obviously like something going on with me as a confident kid, but I also still navigate the same world all of us do. And in this particular week, and only because your last question talked about identity, I'm thinking a lot, about even the news around sort of Chesley Chris and like what it has meant for such a brilliant young woman who ostensibly had everything that anyone could imagine amounts to a successful life and platform and purpose, who ended her life, sort of so prematurely. And it tells me that, especially for those in a group like this, right? Like folks who earlier in their life achieved big things, who had incredible opportunities, who have, leadership and other spaces where people are counting on them and looking to them, which I believe is true, right, of our community, that there's often this disconnect between what we are experiencing personally, which could be an utter crisis of confidence, and how we are asked to show up externally. And we all, I think, have a collective responsibility to get better at making room for that level of honesty where folks can access and get the support and care that they need, so that it's not you're either confident or you're not, you're either strong or you're not, but it's this constant continuum where you're checking in with self to make sure that you are adequately supported in living your most confident and sort of connected life. And I think that's particularly important, again, if you are someone who exists in this world in ways that society does not always value or support or naturally rally around. Like, those individuals need to be, I think, considered even more so. And those communities need to be even more, I would say, just sort of, I don't think it's resilient, but I would say that it is resistant to this idea of not taking care of self or deprioritizing self in ways that could cause harm. So I'll say that. And then just in my book, I mentioned a couple of examples of women who had to lean into this. And the good news is that there's lots of brain science that says confidence can be, it can be built, it can be developed, that by acting more confident, by surrounding yourself with more confident people, by even reading literature and mimicking the behaviors of, you can over time change, sort of how your mind works such that you become more confident. So I would say, no one's excluded from this, and we're all working on it all the time. And it is the thing that often sets us up to either do really big things or shrink back and maybe not get all or achieve all that we might otherwise.
Are there people that you've modeled yourself on, or people that you've kind of held up as kind of, okay, I'm gonna pretend to be Cheryl Conti, or but in order to kind of grow to where you hope to be?
It's interesting. I definitely have a fangirl. There are definitely women that I fangirl over, and I mentioned Cheryl, I mentioned Catherine. There's lots of examples of it. Even with our own community, I always appreciated Jana Wagner, who's the founder of All Our Kin, and the way that she has always just shown up and led in a social impact space. But I will say that some of it comes back to just the most early and basic and fundamental things. Like, I remember my mom used to have a phrase that she would say all the time to me. And she would say, good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. And whenever I feel like I'm just like not doing well in a day, it's usually those words that come back first. The idea that like there's levels to this, and good can turn into better, better turns into best. It's not all at one time. It is a patient, constant journey. Those early things get me farther sometimes than, imitating what I've seen since, because that feels really real and really special to be able to hold on to. And the other thing I would say is there's a lot of work that people do around this, and there's a lot of encouragement to look at others. Some of the work that I think we do less often is learning how to connect with and trust intuition. And so I actually started to read more about that. Like, how do we let our gut tell us what is right for us? Because often our stomach, our gut is giving us information. It's talking to our brains. We are feeling things bodily, but we're maybe socialized not to listen to ourselves, somehow to listen to this other external expert. We are the experts often that we need to be tuning into. So that's the other thing that I try to be more mindful of.
Wow, that idea of sort of that innate expertise versus something that you have to kind of learn externally. I think that's just it's just a really interesting idea. Now, you're an entrepreneur, but you also advise other entrepreneurs. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then I think what we'll do is, I have a couple more questions. I could ask you questions all day, but I definitely want to open the conversation. But, can you talk about sort of advising other entrepreneurs and how you do that and what you get from that, and how you have helped other people as they are starting their businesses?
Sure. I want to talk about the thing that often comes up when I start my advising support, which is folks come to me and they're like, oh, Danielle, I need a website. I need to know what to say at this event. I was asked to speak. What's my story? Can you work with me on my story? And they want me to help them find these perfect words that they can say that will like sound fabulous from the stage and sound perfect on their website and be the right lines in their bio. And it isn't that I don't help folks with that. That is a part of the branding. But I think that what a lot of folks learn as we start to work together in that process is that the story only emerges when you are okay with telling the truth. And the truth that you tell is often the unvarnished stuff that doesn't feel fun and nice and comfortable, and it's not neat and it's not polished and it's not all in a bow. And that is where the nuggets are, right? Like if you can't talk about the time when you were failing and it was hard and you weren't sure you were going to see a way out, or where you weren't confident, or where something didn't go as planned and how you emerged from that, if you only want to talk about the end, people don't connect to that because that doesn't feel real. But we aren't in the habit of this. Our social reels, our LinkedIn, if you look at it, it's a bunch of people bragging about everything that went well. And we have to like let ourselves be okay with the imperfect, the unpolished, the unvarnished. And so a lot of my work with founders, especially executives, where they've had to be competent, perceived as all of these good things, is getting them to a place where they feel that vulnerability can actually be the strength. And they're willing to just talk like humans talk versus trying to sound like some version of what they think leadership is supposed to sound like and look like. And that is the fun part, because so many things, especially with the women executives that I would coach, that they would tell me in confidence or as an aside, were the things that people went wild over when they were willing to share them in honesty and clearly. And the right words to say are the true words that connect you to another human. Those are the right words. And I think sometimes we miss that because we think we need to sound like someone other than ourselves or show up as some version of ourselves that we've so carefully curated. But the cracks start to show, especially as you rise in leadership, because the pressure now for you to keep that up day in and day out, it's almost too much, right? And so that's the part. I think if you're at any point in your career and you're thinking about personal storytelling, branding, if you're thinking about how to tell stories that are impactful for your organization, for yourself, to your teams, I would say begin by asking yourself a set of questions that make you get to the truth. Why you are doing this, how the world is better or different, what you will learn along the way, and then begin there. Like that is, I would say, probably the biggest lesson that I learn and have to take people through over and over. The work doesn't start until you start telling the truth.
So I think, that the idea that we should be asking ourselves those questions, but now it makes a lot of sense. But now I think we should give people a chance to ask you questions because we've got an awesome group of Yaleys here, and they, I'm really curious to hear what they've kind of learned or thoughts that they've had or questions they had as you were kind of sharing some of the work you've done. You want to jump in first?
Right, I'll jump in. So Danielle, it's a great story, and enjoy hearing it. You mentioned something at the beginning when I talk about SOM. So when I went to SOM and I focused on venture capital when I was there, and it was, I was forging my own pathway, right? There was nothing there at all at the time. And I know when you were there, you were doing something engaging in that regard and so forth. So I was just kind of interested in how you navigated the pathway at that point, because I know there was a lot more going on at that time. And then what were those first steps when you first left Yale? I didn't hear that part of the story that got you to where you are right now.
I started where I was. I went to Dwight Hall. I sat in Johnny Scaffidi's office and I was like, Johnny, I don't know what I'm going to do after graduation, but here's what I love. Here's what I think I want to do. And he said to me, all right, Danielle, what you're going to do is you're going to take the fellowship for this summer and you're just going to work in a nonprofit and you're going to keep exploring. And I started reaching out to different alumni and folks who were just local to New Haven, and I would talk to them about what I wanted to do. And I ended up landing a job in, at the time, it was an education advocacy organization, New Haven based. And for the first sort of 2 years of my career, I was working with them, helping with fundraising and communications. And I also went to the Yale Law School and incorporated my first sort of like LLC, just so that I could start to tinker around with the idea of entrepreneurship on the side. And I could take on like projects and be able to be compensated for them. And it was very piecemeal, Jeff. Like, I wish I had a better way of putting it. It was very piecemeal. It was just constantly staying connected, going to conferences, talking to friends, and just consistently telling people what it was that I wanted to do. And if I didn't see someone that had an immediate opportunity, I would build a community around it myself. And we would just like host a conversation, or I would travel to New York and I would attend other events. It was that until I went to grad school, and I went to UPenn for grad school. And there, I sort of was able to, like, during that time, begin to build my own education advocacy organization. And for the next 4 years, when I got back to Connecticut, I ran that organization. And so ever since then, I think I've been consistently either in organizations where my job was to launch something new, or I was building my own side projects. And it was just sort of that mix of real-time experience at work, but then also just being entrepreneurial the whole way through that helped me to get the practice.
Well, what was the degree you got at Penn?
I did an interdisciplinary education degree where I got to take courses at both the law and business school. And it was just for education, leadership, culture, and management.
Great, thanks.
So Rob, you had a question about storytelling. Do you want to share that?
Sure, thanks, Karen. Hey, Danielle.
Hi, Rob.
Thanks for being here tonight. I really love what you said about working with people. They want to sound perfect, but that in order to really be good, you've got to get to your truth, and that's quite the journey. But I wonder if you could say a little bit about the aspects of storytelling, because, like, when I think about my own life, there's so many things I could talk about. How do you help people put things together? There's some tips or techniques or steps you might suggest?
So I take folks through, when I talked about that clarity process, I do a clarity exercise that often asks you to take 2 moments. And so you pick the earliest point you can remember, and then you pick a most recent point, right? So for instance, if you want to be able to define what is my leadership story, what is my leadership journey, you would try to pick the earliest moment where you can remember that you were influencing, driving, motivating, or leading a group or set of individuals. And you would do, like, literally a creative exercise where you either free write. I often encourage clients to draw a picture of it so that it will evoke the scene. Like, where was I? What was I wearing? Who was the group? Was this the first time that you led band practice? Were you great on the field? Did you, like, I don't know, outsell every other troop with cookies? Whatever you were doing, right? And you put yourself in that scene, and then you pick your most recent. And by recent, it could be yesterday, it could be last year. And this is an idea where you say, like, when was I so in sync with myself that I was genuinely able to reflect on being proud of my leadership? And what often happens is, if you draw the picture of that most recent moment and your most distant, you will see some connective themes. You start to ask yourself, what is the same? What is different? Right? Like, what have I kept all along? And then the last part is to ask yourself, why? Why were you excited and willing to step into your leadership in your earliest moment? What was it about it that made you feel called? And then you look at your most recent and you say, why was I proud of myself? Like, what was true about that setting? When you do that cross comparison, you're often left with somewhat of a story around the values that have been showing up for you all along. Strip away the titles, strip away the context in the organization, strip away what feels formal about it. There's something innate to you that's going to show up when you do that type of comparison work. And then once you align to that, every time you begin to tell people, you start with that. Whether it's gratitude, whether it's community, whether it's just a love of the game, like whatever are the things that are showing up, those become anchors for you, Rob, so that what you get out of the habit of is trying to verbally shoot your whole memoir at someone every time you meet them. But instead, use story as a way that opens up the pathways in the brain for mirroring, for genuine connection, that makes it feel like that sort of rush of endorphin, that excitement, right? Like, that's what you're trying to use story to evoke. And so as long as you can be concise in what is it that's the shared point of connection, this other person now starts to be able to pick that up for themselves. And that often leads to a richer opening and dialogue.
That's great. Thank you. Love that exercise.
There's a question in the chat, and then Wadi Sana, you'll be our next guest. There was a question in the chat about have you had clients that are challenging, or what do you have any sort of war stories about challenging clients?
No war stories. The challenge sometimes that I encounter with clients is the hesitation that they might feel around being pushed. Like they want me to just give them the words, just tell me what I'm going to say, and make it sound good. And I often push back on that, because we can write that, but it won't be authentic, and it's not going to get you what you want in the end. And so sometimes the challenge is really getting people to trust the process, that this is not a distraction. I'm not just trying to like bill you for extra hours. I really need you to like go do that internal work and come back to me when you're ready to tell the truth, because our work can't begin until you are. That's always the trickiest part. But I feel like I've been fortunate in that every person who stayed with me through it has felt really excited about where we've come out on the other side of it. And I've been able to help quite a few founders in their early stage startup be able to make that pivot. And that's all. It's always fun for me at the end when they get to look back and see like, oh, okay, that's why we did it this way. But the first few weeks are always a little bit tricky, because I'm making people do stuff that's uncomfortable, and nobody likes that.
Wait, how do you pronounce your name? Wadi Sana?
Right, Wadi Sana. You're like the first person in my life who's ever like first try.
All right, well,
got it right. I was like, whoa.
We should start a party, because we'll invite ourselves and we'll pronounce our name right.
So I came in at the tail end, but I just wanted to say, I'm so grateful to hear what I heard, and in particular, I feel like I've been thrust into kind of a leadership role very unwillingly. Like I studied research in graduate school, at theology school, and looking at women's health, and I have been. I love what you said about finding a nugget of a story, and I've heard other people say that, like, if you look at leaders, many leaders have a story, and I have actually been experimenting with something, and I have a question about whether you think this could be equally effective, of like telling a different story every time. And part of why I've kind of tried to make that almost a signature is to encourage some kind of authenticity, that like every time that someone met me or somebody connected with me, that the foundations and the values were the same, but there was a different story, because I just have so many of them. And so I don't know if that is in the realm of like, her signature was that it was a different story, but it was a story that was values-based and connected, or because it sounded like part of what you're saying, it's almost like you think of like how people, when they study the Bible, or like when somebody preaches on a word, like part of the power of it is like, it's something that everybody has a communal experience with, like a scripture, and then somebody has a completely different interpretation. And so like you're going deeper and deeper into that thing. And so it sounds like part of the value in having one story is that both for yourself and for the person, you get a more intimacy with that. But I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
I don't believe there's one way to approach this. I believe it's about starting with how you want your audience to feel. And sometimes I think we start with like, oh, this is what I need them to know, right? Like, what do I want them to know about me after I've introduced myself and told my story? But I think it's about saying, how do I want them to feel? Because once they feel something, they will want to know more. Giving them something that's interesting doesn't necessarily make them feel something. It doesn't make them want to know more. But when we feel something, we are curious. We want to know more. And so I would say it's probably fine that you have more than one story, especially if your life is rich and interesting. There will be more stories. But every time you tell a story, especially if it's core to who you are in different spaces, that story grows. And it also grows within you. So as you tell a story that you are comfortable with telling, there is a level of comfort and familiarity that comes with it. You also begin to notice what parts of that story connect with people, and it becomes a real instrument and tool in your leadership to like get to the desired effect. because you've already thought it through and you know how it works. It's kind of like a joke. Like some people, they hear a joke for the first time, it's funny, but there are some jokes that like they get funnier every single time you hear them because you notice a different dimension, or there's something else about, you notice the expression of the comedian, or it now takes you back to the time that you first heard the joke and now you laugh double hard because you're laughing about your laugh the last time you laughed, right? Like there's these things grow within us. And so I would say, use your storytelling how you need to, when you need to, but it is always, I believe, a good practice to have a few stories, fewer if possible, that are authentic to you and that you can always leverage as a leader, because it takes some of the guesswork out of what am I going to say? And you can just maybe share different details each time, depending on your audience and what you're trying to achieve. Is that helpful?
Yes, very much. My area is I write about breastfeeding and women's health, and so literally, like that's such a wide it's actually very specific in that it's like not everybody breastfeeds, but it's something that majority of women can do, and so it ends up being that when I'm either talking to people or writing about it, I try to really be very specific about telling stories that will connect to different populations. It might be for cancer survivors or disability or sexual abuse survivors. Like I go within like 360 degrees of breastfeeding, like every different kind of situation, how it would be impacted by this breastfeeding, how it would be impacted by these different things. So as a result, the stories that I tell from my background that get pulled up are really different. And so that's why it's just interesting to kind of writing about something. Obviously is a different kind of modality, but I think one of the things I'm moving towards is looking at with this whole new language around long haul COVID symptoms, looking at long haul sexual abuse survivors and how, you have a lot of people who have abuse history from their young years, and they kind of say, well, that's over, and they like are working and have great lives on the surface, but there's like these long haul symptoms of like not that are kind of ghosts in the background. And so like kind of connecting that, because that comes up a lot with breastfeeding in terms of intimacy, in terms of relationships. And so it lends itself to having more, like there isn't one story, but I can tell that connects to everyone.
Yes, no, I totally understand that. But what you might then do is just to keep some consistency and to make it easier, almost take a formulaic approach to like, are there key lessons, key nuggets, key values, key takeaways, themes even that are consistent threads throughout, but the examples, like the anecdotes themselves might vary, which it seems like they would need to.
Jamil, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, thank you for your insights. I'm a master's student at SOM. So in the meantime, I'm running my own startup. I have a quick question. Do you or does your company have just a training program regarding storytelling? I'm super interested in it.
So I actually have a resource for you. And if I can connect afterwards, I'll try to make sure if there's a way that I can connect, if you want to throw your email or something in the chat. There's a marvelous storyteller. He was Broadway, formerly trained actor turned storytelling and executive speaking coach. His name is Eduardo Placer. When I have worked with a coach, I work with Eduardo because I just adore this man. And he is actively teaching courses. He does content, and he has a class that's coming up in a couple of weeks that I think I've seen him promoting. And if not, it's sort of on a pretty regular rhythm. And I highly recommend going in. Right now, he has one that looks at sort of like the 3 mistakes that you're probably making in your public speaking. And he also has deeper, like weekend long sessions that will take you through sort of how do you get your body ready to speak? How do you get your voice and your throat and everything about you physically prepared for the act of speaking, as well as how do you curate your story? I'm not suggesting me only because I have all of the work that I do in coaching right now. I'm bought out by my company, and I have to like really focus on our portfolio and our org. But I know that Eduardo has resources that are available like right away.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yannick, you had a comment in the chat.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a general comment, but I do want to ask Danielle, since it seems you graduated from Yale College, how did you develop your interaction with the Yale School of Management?
Because I'm very, very persistent. So yes, I graduated from Yale College, but because I was still working and living in New Haven for like the first 8 years out of school, I just stayed very close to the university. And a couple of times, because they were starting to build out the education sort of program that helped with education innovation, and they would host an annual education innovation conference. I attended. There were a couple of times where, because I was running my local organization, I was invited to speak and lead sessions. So the relationship really just developed through faculty that were there at the time and who were working in the startup education space.
Well, I'm glad you took the time to really get to know the university, because there's just a lot of resources here and a lot of people in there. You know, when you're an undergraduate, you're just basically trying to pass and graduate and have a life. And there's a lot you're not going to know if you don't stay in touch with Yale.
I agree.
I know we're getting close to the end of our time, and I just want to know if anyone has a final question. This is a great chance to speak up. If not, I have a final question. So, Charlie.
Hi, wait, how do I lower my hand? Okay. Hi. I was like writing this out, but I'm just gonna speak. When you talked about being in Yale College, you know, like starting out, and you just had no idea what to do. I relate. So what is like one piece of advice you would give when you feel like so many creative ideas or like ways that you want to storytell in like impactful ways, right? What is something you would say to like start channeling it? Because it feels almost like choice overload of like where to start.
Charlie, you still in school, undergrad, graduate? I'd be interested in knowing.
First year undergrad. So I've only been one semester so far.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for coming. You know, you should reach out to some of the people here to mentor you. There's a ton of us.
That would be great.
First of all, the fact that you're here and this is only one semester in tells me that your answers, like you are already on the path to having your own answer. It's literally doing this. I tried so many different things. I had really good friends in my class who started the first digital magazine on Yale's campus, and I was the like one of the people that did the promotion and events for it. Every internship that I could be a part of that let me actively be able to get credit for class, but still be doing real things in the world, I did, because I was someone that I discovered while like I love to write and I appreciate theory, I learn best through doing, and I need to be in spaces that are helping me to learn in real time. And so I would say, use this time to allow yourself to have as many of those experiences so that you really have a sense of what you are not just good at, but like best at, and when you are most aligned and excited energetically. I think that sometimes like we go with what we're good at doing. It's like the performance of being good academically, but we're not following our energy, like the things that just light us up that we would just do all day and lose ourselves in. I do that for a living. Like the stuff that I do every day is the stuff I would probably be doing anyway. And I'm just grateful that I'm doing it in a setting where it's, it's generative for me. It lets me take care of my family. So that's what I would say, Charlie. I would say, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself because you're one semester in and there's going to be lots of opportunities. But if you can give yourself an opportunity, whether it's through like fellowship, travel abroad, sort of active work in New Haven and getting involved in the community, I think that's going to go a long way to helping you to start to narrow what you really want to focus on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Danielle. This is I feel like I've learned so much, and your book has so many good nuggets in it. It's like I need to read it a few more times, to like telling the joke a few more times to really kind of get all the knowledge from it. Jeffrey, I'm going to turn it back to you if you want to close us out.
Well, I appreciate it, Corinne, and Danielle. I mean, really, this just epitomized what this whole shows are about. You know, great guests, good interaction. You just always get a nice nugget out of these, and you gave us lots of nuggets. So really appreciate what you did tonight. And we're all here as a resource. So as you know, as Corinne said before to Charlie, you know, that's what this is about, right? That's why we like it, engaging. You know, be involved. If you see someone, you know, just stay in touch. Come every Thursday. There's always something interesting going on. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next week, and you'll learn something else new and interesting. So thanks again, Corinne, great job, and Danielle, thank you too.